The handcuffs dug deep into the wrists of the man in the bespoke suit. To the officers of the Riverton Police Department, he was just another statistic, a suspect who matched a description that didn't exist. Sergeant Hank Barlow laughed as he shoved the man into the back of the cruiser, mocking his claim of innocence. Barlow thought he was the apex predator in his town. He had no idea that the man in his back seat wasn't just a suspect. He was Special Agent Jerome Hayes, the head of a federal anti-corruption task force, and he had been hunting Barlow for months. Barlow didn't just arrest a man. He arrested the end of his career. Badges hit the floor, and the city of Riverton was about to write a check for $10 million. The Alabama heat pressed down like a physical weight on the asphalt of Highway 231, shimmering in waves of distortion. Special Agent Jerome Hayes adjusted the air conditioning vent in his rental, a charcoal gray Cadillac CT5. He wasn't fond of flashy cars, but the cover story required it. To the locals, he was a logistics consultant scouting warehouse locations for a mid-sized shipping firm out of Birmingham. It was boring, bureaucratic, and specifically designed not to raise eyebrows, unless you were a cop looking for a reason to ruin someone's day. Hayes checked his mirrors. He was maintaining a perfect speed in the proper zone. His hands rested at 10 and 2. He was a 42-year-old black man with a master's degree in criminal psychology and 12 years in the Bureau, currently serving as a senior special agent in the Public Corruption Unit. He knew exactly what he looked like to the sharks patrolling these waters. Bait. He saw the nose of the Dodge Charger dip in his rearview mirror before the lights flickered on. Blue and red strobes cut through the glare of the sun. Hayes didn't sigh. He didn't panic. He felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over him. Here we go, he thought. Phase 1. He signaled, slowed gradually, and pulled onto the gravel shoulder, coming to a complete stop. He rolled all 4 windows down, standard procedure to put the officer at ease, and placed his hands plainly on the steering wheel, fingers spread. The police cruiser sat behind him for a long, uncomfortable stretch. Hayes watched the side mirror. He saw the door open. A boot hit the gravel, then another. 2 officers. One approached the passenger side, hand resting on his holster. The other, a thick-necked man with Oakley sunglasses and a buzz cut, clinging to the last days of his youth, strutted toward the driver's side. This was Sergeant Hank Barlow. Hayes knew his face. He knew his badge number. He knew Barlow's credit score, his mistress's name in Mobile, and the fact that Barlow had 3 excessive force complaints that had mysteriously vanished from the internal server weeks earlier. Barlow leaned down, his face appearing in the window. The smell of chewing tobacco and stale coffee wafted into the car. "License and registration," Barlow said. "No greeting. No good afternoon. Just a demand." "Good afternoon, officer," Hayes said, his voice level and calm. "Is there a reason for the stop?" "License and registration," Barlow repeated, leaning in further. His eyes were hidden behind the reflective lenses, but the sneer was visible. "And don't make me ask you a 3rd time, or we're gonna have a problem." I'm reaching into my jacket pocket for my wallet. Hayes narrated his movements slowly. "My registration is in the glove box. Do it slowly." Hayes produced his license and handed it over. Barlow snatched it, looking at the D.C. address. He scoffed. "Washington, D.C., huh? You a long way from home, boy," Barlow muttered. "What's a D.C. suit doing in Riverton? I'm a consultant. I'm here on business." "Consultant," Barlow repeated, looking at his partner on the other side of the car, Officer Scott Bennett. Bennett was younger, twitchy, looking for approval from his sergeant. "You hear that, Bennett? We got a consultant. Usually, when I see a car this nice driven by a guy like you around here, they're consulting on how to move narcotics up I-65. Hayes's jaw tightened, but his pulse remained steady. I assure you, Sergeant, I have no contraband. If you check my identification properly, you'll see. Get out of the car, Barlow barked, stepping back and unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. Officer, for what reason? I've complied with, I smell marijuana, Barlow lied. The lie was so casual, so practiced, it slid out of his mouth like grease. Probable cause. Get out of the vehicle now. Hayes knew there was no marijuana. He hadn't smoked a day in his life, and the rental smelled like new car spray and leather. But he also knew the game. If he resisted, Barlow would escalate. If he reached for his phone, Barlow might shoot. Hayes undid his seatbelt. He opened the door and stepped out, rising to his full 6'2" height. He towered slightly over Barlow, which clearly irritated the sergeant. Turn around, hands on the hood, spread them. As Hayes turned, he spoke clearly. Sergeant, before you proceed, you need to look inside my wallet. Behind the driver's license, there is a second form of identification. I advise you to look at it. Barlow jammed his knee into the back of Hayes's leg, forcing him off balance. Shut your mouth. You don't give me advice. You stand there, and you shut up. Barlow patted him down aggressively, his hands searching rough and fast. He pulled Hayes's phone out and tossed it on the hood, cracking the screen. He pulled the wallet out and threw it to Bennett. Bennett, run him, see if he's got warrants. I'm gonna tear this car apart. Officer, Hayes said, his face pressed against the hot metal of the roof. I am a federal agent. My credentials are in that wallet. If you continue this search, you are violating federal law. Barlow stopped. The silence on the side of the road was deafening. A cicada buzzed loudly in the nearby pines. Barlow walked up to Hayes's ear, whispering, You think you're the first punk to try and tell me he's a Fed? I bought a fake badge online for a costume party last week. You ain't special. Barlow grabbed Hayes's wrists, twisting them behind his back with unnecessary force, snapping the handcuffs on tight. Click. Click. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting a lawful order, and suspicion of trafficking, Barlow announced, shoving Hayes toward the cruiser. You're making a mistake, Sergeant Barlow, Hayes said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the citizen tone and adopting the command voice he used in interrogations. A career-ending mistake. The only mistake I made, Barlow grinned, opening the back door, was not pulling you over sooner. He shoved Hayes inside. As the door slammed shut, Hayes watched through the cage glass. He saw Barlow high-five Bennett. He saw them pop the trunk of the Cadillac. Hayes closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had to trust the protocol. He had to trust that the tracker in his heel was transmitting, but mostly he had to endure what came next. He wasn't trapped with them. They were trapped with him. The holding cell at the Riverton police precinct smelled of industrial bleach and old sweat. It was a concrete box, painted a depressing shade of institutional gray. Hayes sat on the steel bench, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him. A small act of defiance to maintain his dignity. They hadn't let him make a call. They had confiscated his watch, his belt, his shoelaces, and his wallet. They had tossed him in here to cool off while Barlow wrote up the paperwork. From his position in the cell, Hayes had a limited but crucial view of the bullpen. He watched the ecosystem of the department. It was rotting from the inside out. He saw Officer Bennett sitting at a desk, typing slowly, looking nervous. He saw two other officers, names stitched on their uniforms, Kowalski and Perez. joking near the evidence locker. He watched Perez take a sealed evidence bag, rip the corner open, pinch something out, and slip it into his pocket before resealing it with a piece of tape. Strike one, Hayes noted mentally. Tampering with evidence. Theft. A moment later, a tall, spindly man in a cheap suit walked in. This was Detective Frank Doyle. Hayes recognized him from the dossier. Doyle was the bagman. He collected the protection money from the local gambling dens. Doyle walked straight to Sergeant Barlow's desk, dropped a thick brown envelope on it, and patted Barlow on the shoulder. "Good haul this week, Hank," Doyle said, his voice carrying in the echoing room. "Better be," Barlow grunted, not looking up from his report. "I got a headache. Arrested a comedian out on Highway 231. Claims he's Hoover's ghost." They both laughed. Strike two, Hayes thought. Racketeering, bribery. Hayes stood up and walked to the bars. "Officer," he called out, "I need my phone call." "It is my constitutional right." Barlow looked up from across the room. He stood up, hitching his belt, and sauntered over to the cell. He held a styrofoam cup of coffee, looking at Hayes like he was an insect in a jar. "You know, Agent." Barlow used air quotes dripping with sarcasm. "The phone lines are down. Tragedy, really. Tech guys are working on it. Might take a while." "Barlow," Hayes said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You didn't check the credentials, did you? You tossed the wallet in the bag and you didn't even look." "I don't need to look at fake IDs," Barlow sneered. "Go look." Hayes challenged him. "If I'm lying, you can tack on impersonating an officer. That's a felony. Make your case tighter. Go look." Barlow hesitated. The logic was sound. If the guy was faking, catching him with a fake badge was a slam dunk. "Fine," Barlow spat. "I'll go get your little toy badge. Then I'm gonna book you for it." Barlow turned and walked back to the booking desk. He grabbed a plastic property bag labeled John Doe. He ripped it open and dumped the contents on the counter. The expensive leather wallet thudded against the wood. Hayes watched intently. Barlow flipped the wallet open. He pulled out the driver's license. Then he fingered the flap behind it. He pulled out a black leather booklet with a gold crest embossed on the front. Hayes saw Barlow's shoulders stiffen. Barlow opened the booklet. The gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Below it was a photo of Jerome Hayes in the text. Special Agent Jerome Hayes. Clearance level top secret/magic. Barlow stared at it. He rubbed his thumb over the badge, perhaps hoping the gold paint would smear, proving it was fake. It didn't. It was heavy. It was real. Barlow looked up. His eyes met Hayes's through the bars. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a flicker of pure animalistic fear. He turned to Bennett. "Get the chief," Barlow whispered, his voice cracking. "What?" Bennett asked. "Get the chief!" Barlow screamed, the panic taking over. "Now! Get Fulton down here now!" Barlow looked back at the cell. Hayes was just standing there, arms crossed, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. "The phone lines, Sergeant," Hayes called out. "Are they fixed yet?" Barlow didn't answer. He was frantically typing on his computer, likely trying to delete the arrest record he had just started. Hayes knew what Barlow didn't. When an agent with top-secret clearance triggers a distress signal, which Hayes had done by entering a specific sequence of incorrect passcodes into his phone before they took it, the Bureau doesn't just call, they track. Hayes's phone had been sitting on the booking desk for a stretch. The signal was stationary. "You have about 20 minutes, Sergeant," Hayes said to the empty air. "I'd start practicing your apology. Not that it will help." Suddenly, the front doors of the precinct swung open. It wasn't the FBI, not yet. It was Chief of Police Gary Fulton. He was a red-faced man who looked like he'd been interrupted halfway through a steak dinner. "Barlow, what the hell is this about?" Fulton boomed. "I got a call from the mayor saying the DA is asking questions about a traffic stop." Barlow ran up to the chief, holding the badge like it was a live grenade. "Chief, look." Fulton took the badge. He squinted at it. He looked at the photo. He looked at the cell. "Mother of God," Fulton whispered. He walked over to the bars. "Agent Hayes?" Fulton asked, his voice trembling slightly. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." "Open the door," Hayes said. "I can certainly do that, and we can discuss this in my office." Fulton fumbled for keys. "I'm sure Sergeant Barlow here was just being overzealous. We can," I said, "open the door." Hayes cut him off. "But I'm not going to your office." The lock clicked. The door swung open. Hayes stepped out. He didn't rub his wrists. He didn't stretch. He walked straight to the booking desk, picked up his watch, and strapped it on. "You're free to go, of course," Fulton said, sweating. "We'll drop all charges, expunge the record immediately." Hayes turned to face the entire room. Every cop had stopped what they were doing. The silence was heavy. "I'm not going anywhere," Hayes said. "And neither are you." "Excuse me?" Fulton asked, bristling, trying to regain some authority. "Now look here. I'm trying to be reasonable, but you don't give orders in my house. This isn't your house anymore," Hayes said calmly. He looked at the front entrance, and that's not the wind you hear. Yes, a low, thrumming sound began to vibrate the windows. It grew louder, a rhythmic thwop-thwop-thwoop that shook the coffee in Barlow's cup. Helicopters. Then came the screech of tires, dozens of them. "What is that?" Barlow whispered. Hayes walked over to Barlow, leaned in close, and whispered back, "That's the Karma." The sound outside wasn't just a helicopter. It was a squadron. The glass front doors of the Riverton precinct rattled in their frames. Blue and red lights, brighter and more intense than the local cruisers, flooded the lobby, washing the pale faces of the officers in a chaotic strobe. Chief Fulton rushed to the window, pulling back the blinds. He staggered back as if he'd been punched. It's an army," Fulton stammered. Outside, 3 black SUVs had mounted the curb, blocking the exit. An armored Bearcat vehicle crushed the manicured hedges. Dozens of agents in full tactical gear, emblazoned with the bright yellow FBI letters on their backs, were swarming the perimeter. "Lock the door!" Barlow screamed, his survival instinct kicking in, illogical as it was. "Lock the damn door!" "Don't bother," Hayes said, leaning against the booking desk, checking the time on his wristwatch. "They have a battering ram, and they're not in the mood to knock." A voice, amplified by a megaphone, boomed through the walls, shaking the dust from the ceiling tiles. "This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a federal warrant for the premises. Open the doors and place your weapons on the ground. Failure to comply will be met with force." Officer Bennett looked at Barlow, then at his own gun belt. He was shaking. "Sarge, what do we do?" "We hold the line," Barlow yelled, pulling his weapon. "This is our jurisdiction. They can't just—" "Put it down, you idiot," Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the panic like a whip. "That is an FBI hostage rescue team out there. If you point that weapon at the door, they will turn you into pink mist before you clear the holster. Put it down." Barlow hesitated. He looked at Hayes, seeing the absolute certainty in the agent's eyes. Crash. The front doors didn't just open. They disintegrated. A tactical ram smashed through the glass and metal, sending shards skittering across the linoleum. Flashbang grenades rolled in, not detonating, but serving as a terrifying warning. "Federal agents, get down, get down." The lobby was instantly flooded with operators. Laser sights swept across the room, painting the chests of every Riverton officer. "Drop it!" An agent screamed at Barlow. Barlow's gun clattered to the floor. He raised his hands, his face drained of blood. Bennett was already on his knees, sobbing. Chief Fulton stood frozen, his hands half raised, looking like a statue of a defeated general. A man in a suit, flanked by 2 tactical officers, stepped through the shattered entrance. He was older, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. This was Assistant Director Ray Mitchell, the head of the Birmingham field office. He scanned the room, ignoring the Riverton cops, and locked eyes with Hayes. "Agent Hayes," Mitchell said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "Status?" Hayes pushed off the desk. He walked over to the property bag that Barlow had dumped out earlier. He picked up his badge and wallet, sliding them into his pocket. He picked up his cracked phone. "Secure, sir," Hayes said. "But we have a significant amount of evidence to process, and I'm going to need a medic to document bruising on my wrists for the 18 U.S.C. 242 charge." Mitchell nodded. He turned to the tactical team. "Secure everyone. Nobody leaves. Seize all electronics, computers, phones, body cams. I want the servers pulled from the wall." Fulton found his voice. "Now wait just a minute. You can't just storm a police station. I am the chief of police. I have friends in the governor's office." Mitchell walked up to Fulton, holding up a thick stack of papers. "Chief Fulton, this is a federal search and seizure warrant signed by a U.S. magistrate judge. And this," he handed him a second paper, "is an arrest warrant for you, Sergeant Hank Barlow, Detective Frank Doyle, and 14 other officers under the RICO Act." "RICO?" Fulton gasped. "That's for mobsters." Hayes stepped forward, standing toe-to-toe with the chief. "Exactly," Hayes said coldly. "Organized crime, extortion, drug trafficking, evidence tampering, and deprivation of rights under color of law. You aren't a police department, Fulton. You're a street gang with badges." Hayes turned to the tactical team leader. "Cuff him. Cuff them all." The sound that followed was the most satisfying sound Hayes had heard in years. It was the collective clicking of zip ties and handcuffs. Barlow was slammed against the wall by a burly agent. "You set me up!" Barlow screamed, spitting as he was frisked. "You planned this! You came here on purpose!" Hayes walked over to Barlow. He leaned in close so only Barlow could hear. "I didn't plan for you to be stupid, Hank," Hayes whispered. "I planned to catch a corrupt system. You just happened to be the one who opened the door and invited the devil in. I told you you made a mistake." Barlow was hauled away, kicking and screaming. Hayes looked around the bullpen. The blue wall of silence had fallen. Agents were already boxing up files. Tech specialists were plugging into the mainframe. The Riverton PD was being dismantled piece by piece. "Agent Hayes," Assistant Director Mitchell said, handing him a fresh bottle of water. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Hayes said, rubbing his wrist where the handcuffs had dug in. "But they have a holding cell downstairs. A young man named Devin hit for a broken taillight days ago. Check the logs. I think they've been holding him without charge to pressure his father into selling his shop." "We're on it," Mitchell said. "Go get checked out by the medic. Then if you're up for it, we have 17 interviews to conduct." Hayes cracked his neck. "I'm not tired, sir. I'll take the lead on Barlow." Mitchell smiled grimly. "I thought you might say that. The interrogation room was different when you were on the other side of the table." Hayes sat in the metal chair, a thick file folder in front of him. The two-way mirror to his right reflected his own face, calm, composed, lethal. Across from him sat former Sergeant Hank Barlow. Barlow looked smaller now without the uniform, without the gun, without the sunglasses. He was just a middle-aged bully who had run out of victims. He was handcuffed to the table loop. He had been crying, though he was trying to hide it with a scowl. "You can't keep me here," Barlow muttered. "I want my union rep. Your union rep is currently in the interview room down the hall," Hayes said, flipping the file open. Turns out he was taking a cut of the seized cash from the drug busts. He's cutting a deal right now. "He's not coming, Hank." Barlow's eyes widened. "That's a lie." Hayes pulled a photo from the file and slid it across the table. It was a grainy surveillance photo showing Barlow meeting with a known meth distributor in the parking lot of a diner. Barlow was accepting a white envelope. "You seized 2 kilos of methamphetamine from a courier on I-65, Hayes recited. "You logged 1 kilo into evidence. You sold the other back to the distributor for $20,000. Barlow stared at the photo. "You can't prove that's money. Could be a birthday card." "True." Hayes nodded. "But we have the distributor. We picked him up an hour ago. He keeps very detailed ledgers. He lists you as the toll booth." Barlow went pale. "But that's not what we're here to talk about," Hayes continued, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "That's just drug trafficking, 10 to 20 years. I want to talk about the traffic stops. I want to talk about the profiling. I want to talk about the false arrests. I want to talk about the fact that you and your squad have targeted minority drivers at a rate 400% higher than the state average." "I follow my gut," Barlow spat. "I know a criminal when I see one." "Like me?" Hayes asked, raising an eyebrow. Barlow stayed silent. "Here's the reality, Hank," Hayes said, closing the file. "The Department of Justice is filing a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Riverton tomorrow morning. They are citing 17 officers, including you, as defendants. The city's insurance carrier has already signaled they will not cover criminal acts, which means the city is on the hook." "So?" Barlow sneered. "I don't live in the city. I don't pay taxes here." "No," Hayes corrected, "but the city will settle. Our analysts project a payout of around $10 million to the victims of your gut instinct over recent years. And you know what happens when a city loses $10 million because of a police sergeant?" Hayes paused for effect. "They strip your pension, your house seized, your boat seized, that truck you love so much, government property." Hayes stood up and walked to the mirror, turning his back on Barlow. "But there is a way out. A small, narrow door." "What?" Barlow asked, his voice trembling. "Detective Doyle," Hayes said, turning back. "Doyle is the bag man. He collects the money, but he doesn't keep it all. He kicks it up." "Who does he kick it up to? Is it Fulton? Is it the mayor?" Barlow looked at the table. The silence stretched. He was doing the math. He was weighing his loyalty to the Brotherhood against the prospect of dying in a federal prison broken alone. "If I talk," Barlow whispered, "I need protection. Doyle knows people, bad people. A federal witness protection is on the table," Hayes said, "but only if you give me everything. The stops, the drugs, the money, the names, all of it." Barlow took a ragged breath. He looked up at Hayes, his eyes red and defeated. The arrogance that had been there on the side of Highway 231 was completely extinguished. "Fulton didn't know about the drugs," Barlow said, his voice barely audible. "He's just incompetent. But the money, the protection money from the casinos, that goes to the district attorney." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "District Attorney Victor Langley." "Yeah." Barlow nodded. tears finally spilling over. "Langley runs the county. We just collect the rent. If we don't pay, he launches investigations. If we pay, the complaints disappear." Hayes sat back down. This was bigger than he thought. He pulled a digital recorder from his pocket and set it on the table. "State your name for the record," Hayes commanded. "Hank Barlow," he mumbled. "Louder." "Hank Barlow," he sobbed. "Okay, Hank," Hayes said, opening a fresh notepad. "Start from the beginning. Tell me how you lost your badge." The wire felt itchy against Hank Barlow's skin. Or maybe it was just the nerves. The air at the Golden Pine Country Club smelled of jasmine and money. This was where the real power of Riverton resided. Not in the grubby precinct bullpen, but here among the white linen tablecloths and the clinking of crystal wine glasses. Special Agent Jerome Hayes sat in a surveillance van parked a half-mile away in a wooded service road. He watched the video feed from the button camera on Barlow's shirt. The image was grainy but stable. Beside Hayes sat Assistant Director Ray Mitchell and a team of tech specialists. The audio feed hissed with static before settling into clarity. "Remember, Hank?" Hayes spoke into the headset, his voice feeding into a microscopic earpiece in Barlow's ear canal. "You are desperate. You are scared. You need to tell him the feds are sniffing around. You need him to incriminate himself. Do not deviate from the script." "I got it," Barlow whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead. Barlow stepped out of his truck, which was technically already seized property, though he was allowed to drive it one last time for this operation. He carried a heavy leather satchel. Inside was $50,000 in cash. Every single bill had been photocopied and dusted with a UV reactive powder. Barlow walked up the steps of the clubhouse. The valet looked at him with disdain. Barlow was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight, clearly out of place among the tuxedos and evening gowns inside. "I'm here to see District Attorney Langley," Barlow told the maitre d'. "Mr. Langley is in the library. He's expecting you," the host said, nose in the air. Barlow walked through the dining room. He felt the eyes of the city's elite on him. He felt naked. He entered the library, a dimly lit room lined with mahogany bookshelves and smelling of expensive cigars. District Attorney Victor Langley sat in a leather armchair by the fireplace. He was a man in his 60s, impeccably dressed with a face that smiled for billboards, but eyes that were as cold as a shark's. He was swirling a glass of scotch. "Hank," Langley said, not standing up. "You look terrible. Rough week, you could say that." Barlow said, his voice trembling. He placed the bag on the low table between them. "It's all there. The collection from the gambling on 4th Street, plus the tax from the highway stops." Langley took a sip of his scotch. "Good. Although I heard a rumor, Hank. I heard there was some commotion at the precinct yesterday. Something about a Fed." Hayes leaned forward in the van. This was it. "Yeah," Barlow said, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "That's why I'm here, Victor. A Fed got pulled over. Some guy named Hayes. It's bad. They raided the station. They took files." Langley laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Let them raid. I control the judges in this county, Hank. I control the grand jury. The FBI can sniff around all they want, but they need evidence. And what do they have? A few complaints from drug dealers. Who's going to believe them over a decorated district attorney? But what if they find the ledger?" Barlow asked, improvising. "The one where you track the payments." Langley's smile faded. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "There is no ledger, you idiot. That's why I deal in cash. That's why you bring me this bag every month. No paper trail. No trail. No jail." Langley reached for the bag. He unzipped it. He ran his fingers over the stacks of bills. 50,000, Langley asked. 55, Barlow said. We pushed the guys hard this month. Excellent, Langley smirked. You see, Hank, this is how the world works. The sheep graze, pratasifik, the wolves eat, and the shepherd takes his cut. You're a good wolf. Now, get out of here. I have a dinner reservation. Langley closed the bag and set it on the floor beside his chair. Possession. Take him, Hayes said into the mic. Go, go, go. Mitchell shouted to the tactical teams. Back in the library, the windows suddenly exploded inward. For the second time in days, Hank Barlow hit the floor with his hands over his head. Flashbangs detonated near the fireplace, sending clouds of white smoke billowing through the room. Federal agents, nobody move. Tactical operators poured in through the patio doors in the main entrance. The library was swarming with laser sights. District Attorney Victor Langley stood up, dropping his glass. It shattered on the hardwood. What is the meaning of this? Langley bellowed, his face turning purple. Do you know who I am? Jerome Hayes walked into the room through the smoke, stepping over the broken glass. He wore his FBI windbreaker, his badge hanging visibly around his neck. Victor Langley, Hayes said, his voice cutting through the noise. You are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and obstruction of justice. You have nothing, Langley screamed, pointing a finger at Hayes. I'll have your badge. I'll sue the Bureau into the ground. Hayes walked over to the leather satchel. He picked it up. He pulled out a UV light from his pocket and clicked it on. He shone the purple light onto Langley's hands. They glowed a bright fluorescent orange, the dye from the bills. Hayes shone the light on the bag. Orange. He shone it on Langley's expensive suit jacket. Orange fingerprints, you were saying? Hayes asked. Langley looked at his glowing hands. He looked at Barlow, who was being hauled up by an agent. Barlow, Langley hissed. You rat. I learned from the best. Barlow muttered, looking away. Hayes nodded to the agents. Cuff him and read him his rights. Make sure everyone in the dining room sees him walk out in irons. As they marched the district attorney out through the main dining room, the hush was absolute. The wealthiest citizens of Riverton watched in shock as their golden boy was dragged away. His hands cuffed behind his back, his head hung low. Hayes watched the procession. He felt a heavy weight lift off his chest. The head of the snake was cut off. Now the body would die. The fallout was nuclear. The arrest of District Attorney Victor Langley and the entire command staff of the Riverton Police Department didn't just make the local news. It made national headlines. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. They were all parked on the lawn of the courthouse. Police dragged black FBI agent to jail. The chyrons read, 17 badges gone. The dismantling of the department was swift and brutal. Assistant Director Ray Mitchell and Special Agent Jerome Hayes set up a temporary command post in City Hall. They weren't just investigating crimes anymore. They were effectively running the city's law enforcement until a new, clean interim chief could be brought in from the state capitol. Then came the lawsuits. Hayes stood in the back of the courtroom later. The air was cool-conditioned and smelled of lemon polish. It was the civil court this time. The class action lawsuit, The People versus the City of Riverton, was being finalized. The plaintiff's table was crowded. There was Devin, the young man whose father had been pressured. There was Mrs. Lawson, an elderly woman whose car had been seized and sold at auction because her grandson had a single joint in his pocket. There were dozens of them, black, white, Hispanic, all victims of Barlow's wolf pack. The city attorney stood up. He looked tired. He looked like a man who'd been trying to hold back a tsunami with a teaspoon. Your Honor, the attorney said, The city of Riverton has reached a settlement agreement with the plaintiffs. Proceed, the judge said. The city admits to a systemic failure of oversight. The city agrees to the immediate termination of the 17 officers named in the federal indictment. Furthermore, the city agrees to a total payout of $10 million to be divided among the victims of these illegal practices. A murmur went through the courtroom. $10 million for a town the size of Riverton. It was a crippling blow. It meant no road repairs for years. It meant the new stadium project was canceled. It meant property taxes were going up. But it also meant justice. Hayes watched the faces of the victims. Some were crying. Some were smiling. They were finally being heard. After the hearing, Hayes walked out onto the courthouse steps. The media was in a frenzy, but Hayes slipped through the side exit. He walked down the street toward the police precinct. It was quiet now. The sign out front was being repainted. The windows were fixed, but the parking lot told the real story. There was a row of personal vehicles being towed away. Hayes saw a familiar truck. It was a lifted Ford F-150, blacked out with custom rims. It was Hank Barlow's pride and joy. A repo man was hooking it up to a tow truck. Barlow was there, standing on the sidewalk in civilian clothes, jeans, and a stained t-shirt. He was out on bail awaiting his federal trial, but his assets were already frozen. He watched his truck being lifted into the air. Hayes stopped a few feet away. Barlow turned and saw him. He looked aged. He had lost 20 pounds. The swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. "You happy?" Barlow asked, his voice raspy. "Happiness doesn't factor into it, Hank," Hayes said calmly. "You took an oath. You broke it. You hurt people. This is just the bill coming due." "I lost everything," Barlow said, gesturing to the tow truck. "My wife left me. She took the kids to her sister's in Alabama. The bank took the house yesterday. That truck was the last thing I had. You didn't lose it." Hayes corrected him. "You threw it away. You threw it away the moment you decided that a badge made you a king instead of a servant." Barlow looked at the ground. He kicked a loose pebble. I thought I was doing the job, keeping the town safe." "No," Hayes said, stepping closer. "You were keeping the town afraid. There's a difference." The tow truck engine roared to life. Barlow flinched. He watched as his truck was dragged away down the street, disappearing around the corner. "What happens to you now?" Barlow asked, looking back at Hayes. "I go back to D.C., Hayes said. "I have a new case next week. Another town. Maybe another Barlow. We'll see. I hope I never see you again." Barlow whispered, "If you're lucky." Hayes said, "You won't." Hayes turned and walked away. He walked past the spot where the patrol cars were parked. He saw new officers, younger, diverse, nervous, but respectful, getting briefed by the interim chief. They were being told about the new body camera policies. They were being told about the zero tolerance for bias. Hayes reached his rental car, a new one, not the Cadillac. He opened the door and paused. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Assistant Director Mitchell. "Langley just pled guilty. He's taken 15 years to avoid a life sentence. It's over, Hayes. Great work." Hayes looked at the screen. He looked at the sky. The Alabama sun was still hot, but the humidity seemed to have broken. The air was clearer. He got in the car. He didn't speed. He drove exactly the speed limit, but this time, as he passed a police cruiser parked on the shoulder, the officer inside gave him a nod. Hayes nodded back. The badges were gone. The money was paid. The karma had been delivered. But Hayes knew the work wasn't done. It was never really done. The rain in Washington, D.C. was different from the rain in Alabama. In Riverton, the storms were violent and hot, steaming off the asphalt like a kettle. In D.C., the rain was cold, gray, and persistent. It washed over the J. Edgar Hoover building in relentless sheets, blurring the view of the Capitol from the window of the senior special agent's office. Jerome Hayes sat at his mahogany desk, the leather chair creaking softly as he leaned back. It had been some time since the day he was handcuffed on the side of Highway 231. Some time since the raid. Some time since the city of Riverton had imploded. On his desk sat a heavy spiral-bound document, the Riverton Consent Decree, Final Compliance and Reform Review. It was 300 pages of legalese that summarized the destruction of a corrupt regime. Hayes flipped it open to the executive summary. The numbers were staggering even to him. Personnel terminated, 19, including the chief and administrative support staff involved in the cover-up. Federal indictments, 17. Civil settlement payout, $10.4 million. Municipal bond rating downgrade, AA to B-. The city of Riverton was financially crippled. The settlement had drained the general fund. Hayes had read the reports. The city had to cut trash collection to once every 2 weeks. The public library was now closed on weekends. The 4th of July fireworks had been canceled. This was the part of justice that nobody talked about in the movies. When you cut out a cancer, the body still has to recover from the surgery. The innocent citizens of Riverton were paying the price for the sins of their protectors. It was a bitter pill, but it was necessary. The alternative was leaving the infection to spread. There was a knock on the doorframe. "You reading the obituary?" Hayes looked up. It was Assistant Director Ray Mitchell. He looked older than he had in Alabama. The lines around his eyes etched deeper. He held 2 cups of coffee steaming in the sterile office air. "Just reviewing the bill," Hayes said, accepting the cup. $10 million. That town won't pave a pothole for a decade. Mitchell sat in the chair opposite the desk, blowing on his coffee. "Better potholes than innocent men in prison, Jerome. You saw the audit. Barlow's crew had seized over $2 million in assets in recent years alone. Cars, jewelry, cash. They were robbing people on the highway and calling it civil forfeiture. We didn't just stop a bad cop. We stopped a highway robbery ring." "I know." Hayes sighed, closing the file. "How is Barlow?" "Sentencing was yesterday," Mitchell said quietly. "I didn't think you'd want to go." "I didn't." "He got 12 years, Mitchell said. "Federal guidelines were strict. The judge wanted to make an example. No parole in the federal system, so he'll do at least 10. His wife didn't show up. He cried when the gavel came down, actually wept." Hayes nodded slowly. He felt no joy in it. He felt no glee. He just felt a cold sense of balance being restored. A debt paid. "And Langley?" Hayes asked about the district attorney. "Langley is the interesting one," Mitchell said, a grim smile touching his lips. "He's singing. He's giving us judges. He's giving us state senators. Turns out Riverton was just a franchise. The corruption goes up to the state capitol. We're going to be busy for a long time." Hayes turned his chair to look out the window again. The rain was picking up. "It never ends, does it, sir?" Hayes asked softly. "We cut off one head and 2 more grow back. That's the job, Jerome," Mitchell said, his voice firm. "We aren't exterminators, we're gardeners. We pull the weeds so the flowers have a chance. If you stop pulling, the weeds take over. That's it. That's the whole job." Mitchell reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a manila envelope sealed with the red confidential tape of the bureau. He slid it across the desk. It stopped right on top of the Riverton report. "Speaking of weeds," Mitchell said. Hayes looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it yet. He knew what it was. It was the next assignment, the next town, the next Barlow. "Where?" Hayes asked. "Nevada," Mitchell answered. "Small county called Canyon Ridge, middle of the desert. The sheriff there has been elected 5 times running. He runs the county like a fiefdom. We have reports of hikers disappearing. We have reports of tourists being shaken down. And we have a darker tip that he's using the county impound lot as a transshipment point for the cartel." Hayes stared at the envelope. He could feel the heat of the desert just thinking about it. The profile? "High-stakes gambler," Mitchell said. "We're setting you up as a whale. A rich tech investor from San Francisco with a gambling problem and a trunk full of cash. You're going to drive a Porsche this time. Flashy, arrogant, the kind of guy a bully can't resist taking down a peg." Hayes picked up the envelope. He weighed it in his hand. It felt heavier than paper should feel. "I need a week," Hayes said. "I need to decompress from Riverton. I need to get my head right. Take 2 weeks, Mitchell said, standing up. "But Jerome, be careful on this one. Barlow was a thief. This sheriff in Nevada, our analysts think he's a killer. If he pulls you over, he might not be looking to arrest you." "I know," Hayes said. Mitchell walked to the door, then paused. "You did good work, Jerome. That kid, Devin, the one they were holding, he's back in college. His dad kept the shop. You saved that family. Don't forget that part." Mitchell left. Hayes sat alone in the silence. He opened the drawer of his desk. Inside lay his badge, the gold shield that Barlow had been so terrified of. He picked it up, running his thumb over the raised letters. Special Agent. He thought about the moment on the highway, the fear in his gut when the cuffs went on, the absolute powerlessness of being a black man in the South, in the grip of a racist system. It was a fear that no amount of training could fully erase. He put the badge back in the drawer. He stood up and walked to the closet in the corner of his office. He opened it. Inside hung his suits, the navy blues, the charcoal grays, the uniform of the Washington elite. But in the back, pushed to the side, were the costumes, the leather jackets, the loud Hawaiian shirts, the gold chains. He reached for a silk shirt, something a tech millionaire might wear on a bender in Vegas. He held it up. He walked over to the mirror on the wall. He loosened his tie. He unbuttoned his collar. He ruffled his hair, messing up the neat government-approved trim. He looked at his reflection. The eyes of Special Agent Hayes faded, and the eyes of the new character, the reckless, wealthy target, began to emerge. He wasn't Jerome Hayes anymore, not for the next stretch. He was the bait. He walked back to his desk and picked up the Nevada file. He ripped the red tape. He pulled out the photo of the target, Sheriff Buck Tanner, a massive man with a cowboy hat and eyes like flint. "All right, Sheriff," Hayes whispered to the empty room. "Let's see if you take the bait." Hayes tossed the file into his briefcase and snapped it shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet office. He grabbed his coat and walked out, turning off the lights. The office went dark, but the city outside was glowing. Somewhere in Nevada, a corrupt sheriff was counting his money, thinking he was the king of the world. He had no idea that the storm was already on its way. He had no idea that a man in a Porsche was coming to burn his kingdom to the ground. And Hayes was ready to drive into the fire one more time. The story of Jerome Hayes and the Riverton Police Department is a stark reminder of a simple, often forgotten truth. Authority without accountability is nothing more than tyranny. Sergeant Barlow and his wolf pack believed they were untouchable. They believed the badge on their chest gave them ownership over the people they were sworn to serve. They thought the highway was their own private hunting ground. But they forgot the most dangerous variable in their equation: the victim who refuses to be a victim. In the end, the system worked. But we must remember why it worked. It didn't work because of luck. It worked because one man had the courage and the power to force it to work. The karma that hit Riverton wasn't magic. It was the inevitable, crushing consequence of unchecked greed meeting immovable justice. When 17 badges hit the floor and the city lost $10 million, it wasn't just a punishment, it was a message. A message sent to every corrupt precinct, every crooked judge, and every power-tripping officer in the country. The eyes of justice are always watching, even on a lonely stretch of highway, and you never know who is in the car. And that is the incredible true crime-inspired story of how one routine traffic stop bankrupted a corrupt city and ended 17 careers. Now, I have a question for you. Do you think justice was truly served? $10 million is a lot of money. But does a financial penalty really make up for years of fear and abuse? If you were the judge, would you have given Barlow more than 12 years? The story of Jerome Hayes and the corrupt officers in Riverton leaves us with a powerful, deeply moving lesson that resonates far beyond any badge or courtroom. True power is never found in a uniform or a title. It lives in integrity, courage, and the quiet refusal to let fear silence your voice. When Sergeant Hank Barlow snapped those handcuffs on a man he believed was powerless, he thought he was untouchable. But in that single moment of arrogance, he forgot one of life's hardest truths. Every act of injustice plants a seed, and justice, though it may take time, always finds its way home. What hits hardest is how easily ordinary people can lose their way once they believe the rules no longer apply to them. Barlow and his crew didn't start as villains. They started as men who swore to protect and serve, yet slowly traded their honor for control, money, and ego. Their fall reminds us that character is revealed not when life is easy, but when authority hands you a chance to abuse it. And for every victim who felt small, afraid, or voiceless on the side of that Alabama highway, Jerome Hayes became living proof that standing in your truth, even when your hands are cuffed and your heart is racing, can bring down an entire system built on lies. This story stirs something deep inside, a mix of righteous anger and quiet hope. It tells us that no matter how dark the road gets, one person with courage and conviction can spark real change. It asks us to look inward and ask ourselves, am I living with integrity, or am I letting small compromises chip away at who I want to be? Because in the end, the badges fell, the city paid the price, and justice rolled in like thunder. But the real victory wasn't just the arrests or the settlement. It was the reminder that accountability matters, that no one is above the law, and that standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying, is never wasted. What do you think? Has there ever been a moment in your life when you chose courage over fear, or watched someone in power cross a line? Do you believe financial penalties and prison time are enough, or does true justice need something more? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or made you reflect on the kind of world we want to live in, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you want more powerful, emotional stories about real justice, karma, and the strength of the human spirit, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Let's keep this conversation going together. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay honest, and always remember, the road may feel lonely, but justice is always watching. Word count 278.